Science does not deal in ethics or morals. It cannot tell me how to live or whom to love. All it can tell me is how the world works, or how it may work, and then refer me elsewhere for answers about how to live honorably in such a world. This leads me to say something about the difference between how religion and science know things. While both rely on reason and experience, the most obvious difference is that science depends on observation, while religion depends on revelation. You go to get the first kind of knowledge. The second kind is given to you. The distinction between scientific and religious knowledge is not as clear as it once was. Both are dedicated to the search for truth. Both are vulnerable to error. Both experience awe. According to Albert Einstein, the most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mystical. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit paleontologist, said, "Less and less do I see any difference between research and adoration." Here ends the reading.
A few things that have happened. Make of them what you will. First, well, two things, okay. The first, in 1976, a man who commutes every day from Connecticut to Manhattan calls his wife from the office in the city and says, "I'm taking the late train home." She says, "Sure," she'll pick him up later at the station. And then she says, "Is everything okay?" And he says, he kind of hesitates, and then he says, "I know this sounds ridiculous, but I just have a bad feeling. I'm not getting on the 527. The 527 Amtrak into New Canaan, Connecticut crashes at the station, with many people seriously injured and one fatality. In the mid-15th century, a girl from rural France, whose country is embroiled in what is called the 100 Years' War with England, claims to be guided by a vision from an archangel and insists, way out of her station, insists on being allowed to become a military leader, unheard of for a girl. Not just is this unheard of, but her victory over the English as a soldier and a royal advisor are so shocking that even though she wins for her people, she is put on trial for heresy and dies at the stake. She later becomes the patron saint of France, and of course, I am speaking of that great mystical visionary, Joan of Arc. Those are just two of many stories I've heard in my life that make me go, huh. And as Prince Hamlet said to his friend who doubted that he truly saw the ghost of his own father walking at night after having been poisoned by his uncle, there is more in heaven and earth, Horatio, than is dreamed of in your philosophy. That commuter in 1976 was my dad. I know that many of you have your own similar stories. Maybe you can share some of those eerie stories at the party later. I hope you will. This is the perfect time of year to investigate mystical occurrences and the unexplained, especially when we're waiting in traffic for all of the spooky seekers to wind their way into Salem for many reasons: to learn some history, to have divination readings done, tarot readings or crystal readings, to walk in cemeteries and perhaps encounter an active spirit, and above all, whatever else they're planning to do, to appreciate that life and death are mysteries, and perhaps there is much more going on in our existence than what we can observe, understand, or prove. One of the most appealing aspects of this Unitarian Universalist faith tradition for its adherents is that we seek spiritual meaning and truth with a rationalist orientation. Unitarians have traditionally been skeptics and, again, highly rationalist. Universalists, a little less so. And we can talk about that history some other time. But the Universalists and the Spiritualists, and they meet down the street, have a nice shared history relationship. And the Spiritualists, by the way, are those who commune with and speak with the dead. Thomas Jefferson, who famously said that he expected every man in America would become a Unitarian because it just seemed so reasonable to him, made his own version of the Bible where he literally took scissors and cut out all of the passages dealing with Jesus' miracles, and he pasted the rest of the book together. Now, talk about audacity. The arrogance of this act is pretty staggering, but it's also a good demonstration of the trends in liberal religion of the time. And of course, that also included John Adams and Abigail Adams, whose church was proto-Unitarian, is now Unitarian Universalist. And John and Abigail and his son and his wife are all buried in the crypt down there. And that's the First Parish in Quincy. They were all very eager that the new scientific inquiry of their time and humanistic values, freedom, liberty, equality, be integrated into their theological ideas. By the time I became a Unitarian Universalist as a child in the 1970s, I was dedicated into it. I'm sorry to say that our congregations tended to be full of people who openly disdained any religious beliefs that couldn't be proven. Yikes. For all of our vaunted values of freedom and tolerance, UUs tended to be quite dismissive of those with mystical leanings who wanted to talk about God or spirit or miracles even. To this day, members of our communities tend to find it easier to talk about almost any other deeply held convictions than our religious experiences. We can talk about sexuality all day. We could talk about politics, no problem. But boy, somebody wants to say what God is doing in their life. You okay? No one wants to be thought unreasonable or superstitious or not smart. But why not? Why whisper about the weird, wonderful ways that voices speak to us, or the birds or animals communicate something we needed to hear, or a wild coincidence happens to us that sets us on the right course or saves our life, or a long-dead relative appears in an incredibly realistic dream that we just can't shake that gives us important advice. None of these things can be proven, but we don't need to be self-identified psychics or mediums to have access to all of those promptings of the Spirit, which is what I like to call them. These experiences are common to all of humanity across all cultures. But while other cultures are much more respectful of this kind of receptivity, ours is not so much. Why not? Well, dogmatic rationalism, for one. Also, a very ugly history in this country of persecuting individuals and groups that dared to claim direct access to spiritual knowledge outside of the formal church structure. Ask Tituba of Salem. Ask Anne Hutchinson. Both of these women were banished from the colonies. One of those ladies escaped with her life, we think. The other did not. Spirituality and soul insights are experiential. They are rooted in the body as felt sensations, a source of knowing that we can also call intuition. Scholarship and intellectual inquiry and academic inquiry provide other ways of knowing, also incredibly valuable. But why should we not respect all of the ways we may more deeply know and learn the world and our lives? Why block any of that? It's important not to allow those whose certainty of their own revelations to harm and exploit others, which is why we always want to treat revelation and mystical experience with respect and also test it for delusion. And that's one of the important things we can do in community. But so often intellectually inclined people will immediately back away from such experiences themselves and say, oh, that couldn't have happened, or I must be losing it. That just happened and it seemed really deep, but couldn't have meant anything. Just let it go. That couldn't have been real. And people also often ask me, this thing happened, this thing happened, and do you think it was real? And I say, did it happen? Then it sounds real to me. In other words, I don't know, but it was meaningful. Go with it. What did it have to say? Science and religion are not enemies. They're not even unfriendly neighbors. Science tests, it interrogates, it experiments, explains. It's a method. It's a way for humans to employ our intellect in order to solve problems and figure things out. Religion is story. It's poetry. It's tales shared around the campfire, passed down by our ancient relatives. A way of reaffirming what we don't know and may never understand. Religion speaks the language of metaphor, and many religious people don't read sacred scripture literally, but understand all of them as human attempts to record crucial ideas and sacred encounters. Someone once asked what would happen to my faith if it was proven without a doubt that Jesus never existed. I said, it wouldn't bother me at all, because the teachings, practices, and values, the art, the music, the communities that have risen from the Jesus story will always matter deeply to me and will always have transformed my life. Doesn't matter if he's historically real or not, I don't care. Likewise, the question of whether or not God exists. This question is so bizarre to me because my God is not a thing whose existence could ever be proven. I think of God as a process, an energy. This question is really of zero concern to me, nor do I understand the accusations that I'm dumb because I believe in a big sky daddy. That's not my God concept, though. So I'm not offended by that. I'm not offended by anyone rejecting that concept of God, and I'm not offended by anyone not believing in God and being a full-out atheist. No problem. There are so many ways of understanding and experiencing and explaining the great mystery, which defies definition and description. I often call God, I always just say that's a nickname for the unnameable, magnificent intensity. My hope isn't that people experience or believe in a God, but that all people are able to live freely and with enough of what they need so that they can fully and joyfully experience their lives at every level, including deep communion with spiritual reality by whatever name. I am only offended by those who use their God concepts as a weapon It's fine to say hallelujah. You could go ahead and say that. When we read about mathematicians and scientists who enter into a kind of union with the subject of their study, or what we might call the flow, Einstein searching for a unified theory for general and special relativity, Marie Curie fully absorbed in the question of radioactivity, we can imagine that they must have experienced that same sort of loss of self and total immersion with the ground of being reported by the mystics. Some of you have experienced this. Likewise, many of the most famous mystics were very practical and brainy type people. They were farmers, they were administrators, they were also mathematicians, scientists, physicists. Hildegard of Bingen had mystical visions, concocted medicines for the nuns in her care, which she scientifically experimented on for their efficacy. And she kept the books, the finances, at her convents. Here's one of her statements. I am the fiery life of the essence of God. I am the flame above the beauty in the fields. I shine in the waters. I burn in the sun, the moon, and the stars. And with the airy wind, I quicken all things vitally by an unseen, all-sustaining life. This is, a mystical vision. And then she went and helped the goats and the cows give birth, because she understood that. It is understandable at all times, and especially in this time of extraordinary and justifiable lack of trust, extremism, and the peddling of a lot of nonsense, that we should hold healthy skepticism about any claims to oneness with God or being possessed of special, unique, holy wisdom. There is so much at stake when people fall for charlatans and line up behind false prophets and self-styled gurus. Reality feels shaky right now. We need a new set of skills and media literacy so that we can navigate the new wild territory of AI, generated images, deep fakes, and all of the ways that technology is being used to shape and manipulate our perception. That said, and that is really an enormous new challenge to building a consensus about what is real and true and what is fake news, it is part of our tradition to trust what Ralph Waldo Emerson called a first-hand acquaintance with the divine. Revelation is not sealed, he said, and that's true. If we're not open to the possibility of our own selves and those we know as conduits of wisdom, of recipients of spiritual insight, as messengers of holy love and healing, we may block those gifts from an excess of caution, intellectualism, and embarrassment. I greet you, magical ones, in this season of mystery, of encounter with the spirit world, and encourage you and invite you to climb over the old New England stone wall that marks an unnecessary boundary that separates what the mind understands and what the spirit receives. While we're at it, let's take down the wall together, stone by stone, so that we can create a new and open field for what we call knowledge. In the name of the scientists and the mystics and the spirit that moves through them all and through all of us, so may it be.